Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, the head of California's Republican Party, Jim Brulte, on the risks for California as it becomes a resistant stronghold against President Donald Trump. Plus, part two of my interview with former CIA Director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. He shares his thoughts on the uncertain road ahead for national security and foreign policy. And a report from the border about a group of volunteers who searched the desert for lost migrants. But we begin with President Trump's first week in office as we look at the first 100 days of his presidency. He's taken swift action on a number of issues, including dramatically changing the country's refugee program. He also signed several executive orders to roll back the Affordable Care Act, expedite environmental reviews for infrastructure projects, and he issued orders on immigration, including one that authorizes work on a new wall along the U.S. Mexico border, triples the number of immigration officers, and cuts off federal funding to sanctuary cities. Here's what President Trump said.
From day one, I've said it, and I mean the immediate removal of criminal aliens. They're going to be gone fast. And finally, at long last, cracking down on sanctuary cities.
And joining me now with a closer look at immigration are Republican strategist Sean Walsh and KQED senior editor of California Politics and Government, Scott Shafer. Welcome to you both. We will get to the issue of undocumented immigrants in just a moment. But Sean, let me first ask you about something that just happened this afternoon. President Trump signed an executive order that severely curtails the refugee program to keep out radical Islamic terrorists. Will that actually do anything to cut down on terrorism, or is it simply feeding into anti-Muslim bigotry?
Well, I think, number one, you're sending a message to the pipeline from the origin of where these refugees are coming from, and it's probably going to slow that down to a trickle, number one. Number two, with regards to refugees, it gives a chance, actually, for those that are here now, I think, to get enhanced screening. And number three, the issue of refugees is not just simply the ones that we allow in on airplanes and on boats. It's actually the refugees now that are coming across the border in Mexico from a lot of these Arab and Muslim countries. And so the question is, that will really not do much to stop that. You're going to have to do the enhanced border patrols to deal with that issue.
And I know, Scott, that you've been talking to some of the folks who work with refugees. What are their feelings among the advocates?
Well, and it's not just refugees. I spoke with an attorney who was at SFO just a few hours ago, and he has two clients, two Iranian families that have legal visas. They were waiting to come in and from Iran, and he told them to come now because he was concerned about how this executive order might affect their ability to get into the country. And so it's, they're concerned about people, for example, Iranian citizens who are here and they want to bring their wives or their kids over. How is it going to affect them? So it isn't just refugees. We haven't seen the order. That's part of the problem. We don't know exactly what he signed. The White House hasn't released it, at least as we're here talking right now.
Yeah, there has been some talk that there are over 7 Middle Eastern countries in that order, again, but in draft form. So Iran, Iraq, Syria among the countries, but we'll wait to get more details. In the meantime, let's talk some more about immigration and the issue of that wall along the Mexican border. It will take billions of dollars. Mexico already said, we're not paying for it. And President Trump sowed some confusion yesterday when he talked about a 20% tax on imports, and then the administration kind of backtracks from that. So what do you make of all this? Where will the money come from, and why all these different trial balloons being floated out there?
I think as we've had a week of President Trump now, and I think we're beginning to see what his style is a little bit, and he likes to float trial balloons. If they don't do well, he can blame the media for misreporting it or saying it was misunderstood. This is, I think, a president who thrives on confusion, actually. He thrives on creating chaos. And we'll see how that works out, but we don't know exactly how it's going to be paid for. Congress says we'll put the money up front, $12 billion or so, and then President Trump is saying, well, we'll figure out a way to get it from the Mexican government. But even that 20% tariff, ultimately that gets paid by consumers. American consumers are the ones who would pay for it. So it remains to be seen. Like a lot of the things he's done this past week, big headlines, lots of concern or cheering, but the details are a little bit hard to come by.
Well, number one, I'm not sure why everybody thinks this wall is such a new idea. In 2006, there was an authorization for $4.5 billion to actually construct a wall or a border A lot of California is actually already fenced off. Whether it's adequate enough remains to be seen. But $1.2 billion was spent of that. There's still authorization to do this. This is nothing new at all, really. So I'm not sure why people are making such a big deal about it, number one.
But where will the rest of the money come from now?
Well, there's already should be $3 billion in authorization that's out there. Congress can fund based on that authorization bill, or Congress can come up with the money. Now, with regards to, people say, well, it's just going to be paid for by consumers in California or consumers in the United States. Well, consumers in California and the United States are already actually paying for undocumented immigrants. When Governor Wilson 25 years ago was governor, we estimated over $5 billion in cost to state taxpayers. I can only imagine what that is 25 years from now. So you can say it'll cost $14 billion for a wall, but how much is state and federal government actually paying for people who are not legally in the country now?
I would just add, I know that you're talking about costs for what, incarceration or something like that. I've seen numbers as high as $10 billion, which is the entire corrections budget for the state of California. Clearly, that can't be accurate. What's left out of that, though, is that a lot of these folks are working, they're paying taxes which they can't collect back on the back end as retirees because they're not here legally. So I think when you net all that out, Sean, I would imagine it's a much smaller number.
And I think there also have been a number of studies, Sean, that show that that because the immigrants are willing to work for lower wages in many cases, that actually provides a benefit to some households in terms of cheaper prices paid for goods and services, like household help, for example. So those things have to be weighted in as well.
Well, that's an argument, and it goes into the totality. But with regards to education, I would argue we're probably well over $5 billion a year in California for educating people that are not legally in the country. And if you factor in citizen children, I cannot imagine how much more money that is. So to undocumented immigrants maybe in the country.
But if you're talking about dreamers, I mean, they're essentially American, right? I mean, they were brought here as kids, and they're essentially American.
Well,
and the children of undocumented immigrants in this country are citizens, the ones born here.
They are, but they are born here as a result of people who are not legally here in the country. And the dreamers are, it depends on how old those children are, but they actually are not legally here in the country. So you can agree whether it's the right, humane thing to do, or say the kid came in at 12 and it's the right thing to do. Regardless, that is still a cost borne by the federal government, and it's a cost borne by the state government. And so it's a policy decision that whether you want to fund that or not. And Donald Trump in large part was elected based on the fact that he believes that we shouldn't be paying for those costs. So again, whether you agree with it or not agree with it is a real
right.
I think what the two of you can agree on, though, is that there are a lot of conflicting numbers here, as there have been for years.
We call them alternate facts.
We call that on a different program. We don't deal with alternative facts on this program. I want to talk about California Governor Jerry Brown. He threw down the gauntlet on immigration during his speech this week on the state of the state. Here's what he said.
California has enacted several protective measures for the undocumented: the Trust Act, the driver's licenses, basic employment rights, and non-discriminatory access to higher education. This is what made the Dreamers, and you made it happen. We may be called to defend those laws, and defend them we will. And let me be clear. We will defend everybody, every man, woman, and child who's come here for a better life and has contributed to the well-being of our state.
So, Sean, you just came back from Washington, D.C. this morning, as a matter of fact, after talking to Republicans. Will this kind of rhetoric from Governor Brown only make California even more of a target with this kind of talk?
Actually, so I actually read his speech on my way over here today, and he also has several lines that he acknowledges that the federal government has responsibility for immigration policy in the United States, and courts have clearly upheld that. So that's a lot of strong rhetoric that plays well to his Democratic base. But I think there was a very realistic acknowledgement that the federal government is going to have a role here, and a very strong one. So what they can fight and what they can't fight. So to Governor Brown's credit, I think he was somewhat realistic. Again, if you read the text, I think some of our mayors and some of our other politicians in the legislature have not been very realistic, and they're playing a very dangerous game.
Speaking of mayors, I want to also talk about the mayors of San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and San Jose. They all issued a joint statement vowing to fight Trump's order on sanctuary cities. San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee talked about that during his State of the City speech this week. Let's listen to that.
In our America, we embrace our differences and understand that they make us stronger and more vibrant. We are a sanctuary city, now, tomorrow, forever.
So, Scott, California gets about $105 billion in federal funding. Where will all that money, how will it be replaced if funding gets pulled because of the sanctuary cities?
Well, first of all, I don't think it would not all be pulled. For example, there's some precedent from the Supreme Court that says that if you're going to restrict or limit or take away money, it has to be related to the activity that the local government isn't cooperating on. And this was a case, by the way, that conservative states made when it came to cooperating on gun control and the Affordable Care Act. So we'll see if it holds up as well for liberals. But I think it's also important to say, it's not just as the borders are not porous. We have a lot of people being deported. Obama deported 2.5 million people, mostly who had criminal records and had the kinds of problems that we're hearing President Trump talk about. And already jails and prisons, anybody who comes in and is fingerprinted, they're sharing that information with the federal government now. Already, they've been doing that for a long time under a law that was passed and signed by President Obama. So I think we have to remember, it's not like just people are pouring in. There are a lot of measures already that are sharing information with local governments and the federal government.
Well, I have a little bit of a different take.
I had a feeling you would.
So most of the deportations have been criminals, but actually at the border under the Obama administration in the last 4 years, folks that have come to the border literally, when they cross the border, run to where the Border Patrol officers are. Actually, they get a ride, then they get taken to where family is in the interior of the country, and then some of them actually get Samsung Galaxy 4 smartphones, theoretically, to keep track of them, and they come back for their deportation hearings, which they don't show up.
That, Sean? So that sounds like a good story, but I'd love to see the data on that.
The data is there, and
Okay.
and very, very few actually were deported under the Obama administration vis-a-vis how many have actually entered the country. So, again, I disagree.
But it was a record number of deportations by any president.
How many people have been deported versus how many have entered the country? I'd say it's millions more have entered the country than have been deported.
Okay. All right. You get to have the last word on that. Scott will fact check, I'm sure, and get back to you. Thank you both,
Sounds
gentlemen.
like fuzzy math.
Thank you both, gentlemen, Scott Shafer and Sean Walsh. Well, last week, as the nation prepared for a new presidency, we talked with Jim Brulte, chairman of the California Republican Party. He took aim at California lawmakers and their resistance to the Trump administration. Scott Shafer has more.
So as chair of the California Republican Party, which did not give landslide approval to Donald Trump, where does the party in California stand, and Republicans more generally?
Well, we've been working to rebuild the party from the ground up. Donald Trump did not target California, but we're really excited. We think this brings a new energy to our volunteer base. We have over 300,000 Trump volunteers, most of whom had never been involved in politics before.
Many in the Republican Party, and I know you were scrupulously neutral during the primary, but there were many who did not want Donald Trump. They wanted anybody but Donald Trump to be the nominee, and now he's president. Many of them didn't support him for president.
Most of them have amnesia, by the way. They, I talked to a lot of them. Hey, can you get me a job with the administration? And I said, I thought you were never Trump. Oh, no. Evidently, I have a better memory about what they did than they do.
Are they out in the wilderness now?
No, I don't think they're out in the wilderness, but politics is a team sport. And when you decide that you're going to join the other team, or you decide you're not going to help your team because you lost the intramural skirmish, that's just poor sportsmanship.
California is setting itself up to be the chief resistance to the Trump agenda from Jerry Brown on down. What do you make of that strategy, and how effective is it likely to be?
Well, I think the Democrats who own state government in California ought to focus on the problems in California that they've created rather than worry about potential problems they think President Trump is going to create. We have the largest income inequality in America. We have the highest poverty rate in America, and that's before Donald Trump was sworn in as president. That's not a Donald Trump created problem. That's a California-centric problem that the people who run Sacramento ought to be addressing. We are adding jobs in California, but we're not adding jobs that pay as much as the jobs we're losing in California. We have a huge divide between the coast of California and the Central Valley and interior of California. That's all not Donald Trump's fault. I think they would be better served if they focused on problems they can fix, which in many cases they created.
There are still a lot of very raw feelings about the last election, and many would say that Donald Trump has contributed to that through his tweets and his comments. What would you like to see President Trump do to heal some of those wounds going forward?
Well, you know, I think it takes two to tango. And frankly, I am disappointed and frankly a little disgusted that some of the Washington liberal elite have boycotted the last two Republican presidents' first inaugurations. You know, every Republican that's elected to Sacramento gets lectured by the Democrat leadership about how we're in charge, and if you want to be really good, you'll find a way of working in a bipartisan manner with us. Now, some of those same Democrats in California don't walk their own talk.
Would you like to see this president reach out and not just wait for Democrats to come to him, but for him as president?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump has reached out. And if you don't know what Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton has said about Republicans over the last 8 years, I'm happy to get you a lot of tape from stories that played on your television station. You know, the left has a selective memory. They think they're all inclusive and Republicans are intolerant. And I'm happy to roll out scores of examples where the left is intolerant. The election is over. We celebrate the peaceful transition of power, and everyone ought to celebrate that peaceful transition.
Now to national security. This week, former CIA Director Leon Panetta had sharp words for President Trump, telling Politico that Trump's support for using torture is raising questions about the nation's credibility. And he said raising even greater questions with regards to our security. Panetta headed the CIA during President Obama's first term, then later became Secretary of Defense. He also served 16 years in Congress. In part 2 of our interview, Secretary Panetta discusses the importance of working closely with intelligence agencies and Congress on key security issues. President Trump has disparaged the intelligence community. He blamed them for leaking a dossier detailing unverified efforts by the Kremlin to compromise him, comparing that basically to Nazi Germany. He, in this case, you know, there have always been disagreements in prior administrations, right? But they take place in private. Yeah. What is the risk here to this kind of public back and forth between a president and the intelligence community?
I worry for several reasons. Number one, it sends a message to our adversaries that because a president and our intelligence agencies disagree and are divided on the issues, that somehow they're free to take advantage of that. Number two, it really does impact on the credibility of our intelligence agencies and what they do. And the reality is that a president, any president, needs good intelligence. You need to know the truth about what's going on with our adversaries. And when this kind of thing happens, it's going to impact on the credibility of what the intelligence agencies present. And lastly, it clearly undermines the morale of our intelligence officers and individuals who are out there every day trying to determine what our adversaries are up to. These are good people. They really are dedicated to trying to protect this country. And I think when the president demeans what they do, he undermines their morale. And let me tell you something. Some of these jobs require people to put their lives on the line. And I worry about whether or not people are going to be willing to put their lives on the line, as they have to, when they have a president who may not pay attention to what they're able to determine is the truth.
The whole Russian hacking issue and if and whether it affected the election continues to be a point of contention. Isn't that indicative of a much larger problem than just Russia?
We're in a new world when it comes to the use of cyber and cyber attacks. And countries are developing that capability. We've seen it used to go after intellectual property. We've seen it used to create denial of services among major industries in this country and elsewhere. There's the potential to virtually cripple a country, take down our electric grid, take down our financial systems, take down our government system.
In your book, Worthy Fights, you write about your nearly 4 decades in public service, and one of the themes I saw throughout the book was the importance of making allies. In fact, in your own words, you say relationships matter. So what would it take to see bipartisan cooperation in this new environment with the new administration and the new Congress?
I think the biggest task facing a new president is to break the gridlock in Washington and to be able to return to governing, where you can work with the Congress and administration and deal with the major issues facing this country.
And how does he do that, though,
Well,
given the divisiveness
there are
right
ways
now?
to do this. The good news is I've seen Washington work. I mean, when I was there in the Congress, we had Republicans, Democrats working together, working with a Republican president or working with a Democratic president to get things done. But to do that, a president has to be willing to bring people into the room, to be able to talk with them honestly, and to make clear that he's going to trust them and they are going to trust the president. You've got to set aside all of the campaign and all of the rhetoric of the campaign. And you now have a chance in the Oval Office as President of the United States to make decisions that can make the lives of our children better. That ought to be your fundamental focus. If you do that, if you focus on that, then I think good things can happen.
The president's controversial efforts to build a wall along the U.S. Mexico border comes amid an already rising number of border crossing deaths. Hundreds of migrants have lost their lives attempting the dangerous trek through desert terrain to reach the U.S. illegally. One group of volunteers who call themselves Eagles of the Desert make regular trips to search for migrants who have gone missing, all too often finding only human remains. In this next story, KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero joins one of these search parties.
Jose Hennis notes the GPS coordinates of another human skull we've found in the Arizona desert. He's part of Águilas del Desierto, or Eagles of the Desert. They search for migrants who go missing at the border. Sometimes the volunteers save people. Often, they're just locating the remains to help families move on.
The family's desperate to find answers. And, this organization actually helps bring closure to some.
The volunteers send the location of their latest discovery to local officials, who will transport the remains for DNA analyses. The volunteers hike out of the desert. I'm documenting their work on my iPhone.
I hope that someday, we can actually stop what we're doing, but I don't see an end to this.
Border crossing deaths have skyrocketed since long stretches of border fence were built in the 1990s, rerouting migrant traffic into the dangerous desert.
We're gonna build a wall!
President Donald Trump has vowed to expand that fencing.
We're gonna build a wall!
Signs of migrants are everywhere on this border crossing route. Discarded Red Bulls, abandoned backpacks, toys, even shredded female underwear. As we search, an unfamiliar male voice comes on the radio. It asks us to identify ourselves.
We're all regrouping. We're walking together because apparently, hold on. Can you tell me what's happening, Jose?
So we're walking, and we usually carry walkie-talkies, and we're in channel 2, and apparently somebody else came into our channel.
The voice said it could see us in our yellow shirts. It demanded to know if we were Border Patrol. Henny says we're being watched by a smuggler. He says the risks for the group have increased as a longer fence has pushed migrants onto the same routes as drug traffickers. We quicken our pace. When things go south like this, founder Eli Ortiz gets worried. He's trying to guide us back to the cars. As we hurry out, we come across a phone. The Águilas decide to keep it in case it contains clues about a missing person.
Take that case with you, too.
Finally, reunited with the cars, we drive out of the desert. In a nearby town, an Indian woman uses a traditional ceremony to cleanse all of us with sage smoke. She says the spirit of the dead is clinging to our flesh and that she must remove it. Back home, the volunteers charge the phone we found on the ground and discover it belonged to a man named Martín Sarabia. The 7 most recent calls were to 911. I request recordings of Sarabia's calls from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. They sent me the recordings.
911, where's your emergency? Hello? I'm sorry, what?
Eventually, the dispatcher transferred the call to Borstar, a Border Patrol search and rescue unit created in 1998 in response to rising border crossing deaths. They failed to locate Sarabia. It seems uncanny that a banal-looking phone we found contains such a sad story. I think of all the other mysterious items we passed on our search. What secrets do they hold about other missing people? Back in the desert, Aguilar's founder Ortiz tells me he feels a duty to search, despite the risk of running into drug traffickers.
What will happen the day we confront these people? What if they do something to us?
He says no one else is willing to take on that risk for anonymous migrants, especially as isolationist politics gain momentum in the country. But the Aguilas identify with the border crossers. The volunteers are bilingual. They come from families with mixed immigration statuses. Some were born in Mexico. Henny says that for the Aguilas, there's no them, just us.
You know, if they need help, we should just help. If they're willing to leave the country and risk their life to go through all this, you know, that it must be a tough life for them. So my life is pretty good right now. So, I mean, why not help out?
As long as people are dying at the border, he says, the volunteers will risk their lives to find them. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
And that does it for us. You can find more of our coverage online at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for watching.